Inflation is crushing American families, and it's crushing Utah families. Currently, the national inflation rate is 9.1%. But inflation isn't affecting all states equally. In Utah, inflation has grown to nearly 15%. This means that the average Utah family is paying $881 a month, every month, more than last year, just to fulfill their basic needs. Utahns have been enduring the skyrocketing price of living for months. Since this runaway inflation began, I've been receiving an outpouring of phone calls, emails, and letters from anxious Utahns, understandably struggling just to make ends meet. Yet the United States Senate continues to float spending proposals with multi-billion dollar price tags involving hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. The nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, an Orwellian name if I've ever heard one, will raise taxes by $313 billion over the next 10 years. $313 billion. This at a time when Americans are wondering how they're going to fill their gas tanks, how they're going to pay their rent, and how they're going to feed their families. So how did we get here? How did we get to the point where Utahns are spending $881 a month more than they were just last year in order to survive? The Biden administration's evolving blame game has shifted. It's shifted its focus over and over again, from the pandemic to the supply chain, from the supply chain to Putin. There is, however, a more consistent answer. Government continues to spend more than it brings in, a lot more. In fact, last year, Congress spent $6.8 trillion, even while they collected just barely over $4 trillion in revenue. The rest was effectively printed. And yet, rather than recognizing the problem, we continue to do the same thing over and over again. We continue down this misguided path. We think, or at least the Democrats in the Senate and the White House think, that we can somehow just throw more money at this problem and keep doing that until the problem goes away, never realizing that they're perpetuating the problem. Senate Democrats have been trying to pass President Biden's ill-fated, ill-conceived Build Back Better bill for months. Now, obviously, they had neither the support from the people nor the support within Congress to pass the bill, so they couldn't do it. So what do you do when you can't pass your latest pet project because it's wildly unpopular and with good reason? Well, we've seen now that you just repackage the same legislation with a bogus title like the Inflation Reduction Act and try to cram it down the throats of the American people once more. And you try to do it fast enough that maybe they won't notice. Look, the American people are smarter than that, and they deserve honesty. We need to be honest. We can't pretend that this is okay. Now, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and you certainly shouldn't accept this bill based on its title. Despite its lofty-sounding name, this bill will not reduce inflation. Quite to the contrary, it'll make it a lot worse. The Penn-Wharton budget model broke this down, and what it concluded is that the bill has no deficit reduction at all until at least 2027, 5 years from now. Now, even if you accept the Democrats' premise and their argument on this, which I don't because it's deeply flawed, but even if you do, even then, most of the spending in the bill is front-end loaded, whereas the revenues in the bill are back-end loaded, meaning the spending's going to happen, the increased revenue and the deficit reduction probably will never occur. I hear from constituents every day, people who need relief now. Utahns can't endure this kind of inflation. They should never be expected to simply tolerate this level of inflation. We're talking 15%. 15% inflation is an enormous amount of money. Most Americans are paid on a biweekly basis, meaning that they receive 26 paychecks per year. What that translates into is that nearly 2 months of Americans' income is going to Biden's inflation. Many Americans are already living month to month, even week to week, especially in Utah, where the cost of living is spiked to particularly unsustainable degrees. How do we expect Americans to survive if nearly 2 months of their income is wiped off the books because of Biden's invisible tax? 15%. That means 3.9% of your paychecks, if you receive 26 per year, just become meaningless. All because Biden wants to spend money that the federal government doesn't have and claim that he's somehow helping you. We cannot afford to be spending on Green New Deal policies while we're currently in a recession. President Biden saying that we're not technically in a recession is not an acceptable response to Utahns wondering why they're paying an extra $881 a month every month due to his inflation. I'd like to read some letters from Utahns. I want you to hear from them directly. These are real people, hardworking Americans living in Utah. Their message is resounding and it's consistent. They can no longer afford the Biden administration's misguided policies. Jenny from Salt Lake City writes, quote, "My annual income is about $30,000. I'm panicking. The price of groceries and other goods has increased so much I'm struggling financially. I understand my utility bills could double or even triple. I don't know how I can afford to live. I have no family with room for me in their home," close quote. Now, tell me this, how could we in good conscience vote to increase taxes when Jenny is already panicking because these policies aren't working? When she's already struggling to feed herself and keep a roof over her head, why would we want to make these things worse by doing more of the same things that have made them bad? Luann from Eagle Mountain writes, quote, "I'm writing with my concerns as a disabled person on a super fixed income. I just had to pay over $4 a gallon for milk, and it's getting to where I can't even afford that. It's either food or my medication, and I have to do without one or the other at this point. Please, can't you do something about these super rising prices, because it's killing the low income, it's killing the disabled, it's killing the restricted income," close quote. How can we vote for a bill that hamstrings research and development for life-saving drugs? A measure that we know will lead to fewer life-saving drugs and other treatments making it onto the market. While Luann is already in a position between having to choose between whether she should buy food or buy her medication, this Congress, this President, this Senate, they all want to pass a bill that the Congressional Budget Office has estimated will increase the price on the few drugs that are even lucky enough to make it to the market. Even worse, the CBO estimates that those on Medicaid will disproportionately feel the increase. We're selling out the most vulnerable. This is a classic example of the government breaking your legs, then calling itself a hero for giving you a crutch. Mike from Washington City, Utah, writes, quote, "I have a small farm I use as a place to grow food for my family. It has a propane tank I fill once a year. Last year, it was $588 to fill. I just filled it this year, and it was almost $1,300 for the same amount as last year. This type of inflation is not sustainable for my family," close quote. Where's the relief for Mike from the city of Washington? Are we really ready to tell him, look, we're very sorry, sir, but you're going to have to endure all of this for at least another half decade? That's our response? It can't be. James from Highland, Utah writes, quote, "I'm on Social Security and inflation is really hurting me. Something has got to be done. Groceries have gone through the roof and have gone up way more than the 6% or so that was listed as the general inflation rate. Please help if you can," close quote. How can we vote to increase taxes while James and so many others like him are already struggling on fixed incomes? If James's taxes increase, what will he have to cut? If James's income is slashed, if everything he buys becomes more expensive because of this bill, then what will he do? Kevin from Murray, Utah writes, quote, This morning I filled up my work pickup truck. It cost $149. I'm a small business general contractor, and the price of fuel is a major challenge for a company of 5 vehicles traveling to our various projects. Please reduce regulations and allow domestic production to advance and supply to increase and lower prices, close quote. How can we vote on a bill that spends $270 billion in tax carve-outs for Green New Deal pet projects? No doubt these provisions will increase the cost of oil and gas. How can we, in good conscience, vote to increase energy costs when Kevin's already struggling to fill his truck that he needs to support his business? These letters, they represent just a tiny fraction of my office's correspondence on this issue. They're just the tip of the iceberg. Now, I know that my office is not alone. Every member of the United States Senate hears gut-wrenching stories from people wondering how they're going to make it to next month. We need to listen to their cries for help. American families simply cannot afford the Biden administration's latest tax and spending scheme. If the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, then spending more money and increasing taxes to reduce inflation meets that definition.